Sorry. Hi everyone.
Hello.
Very happy to be live with Andrew Lowe. Do you want to start us off with an introduction to yourself and your books?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I write the Jake Sawyer crime thrillers. They're set in the Peak District, Derbyshire, a little bit of Manchester, a bit of Sheffield, and so North. We said this before, but I kind of think of it as Northern Noir, I suppose. And yeah, I'm an ex-film journalist, video game journalist. But then the internet came along and ruined that, so I had to do something different. So I started writing books, and yeah, I wanted to write a series. I wanted to write characters who basically a character who was a series about the main character, and because I often read series with continuity where you have the kind of crimes happen in each book, and then there's a little bit of backstory with the main detective. But I think the thing I wanted to write was pretty much it's all about the main detective, and the crimes kind of orbit his thing, the thing that he has going on all the way through. And so the thing that he has going on is that when he was 6 years of age, he witnessed his mother being brutally murdered in a lane in the Peak District on a summer's day, and his brother was attacked. His dog was killed, and the most horrific kind of scene I can sort of pull out of my dark mind. And I just thought, it was kind of inspired, that's the right word, by the Rachel McKell murder that happened, I think, in the late 90s or the mid 90s on Wimbledon Common. And her son, who was 2 or 3 at the time, he survived her murder, which is horrific. And so yeah, that's really my idea, was that what if the young child who survived that went on to, grew up to become a detective, grew up to what kind of baggage would he carry with him? How would it sort of help him, hinder him in kind of facing all kinds of kind of dark horrors that are kind of expected in obviously dark crime books. So yeah, they're not very cozy. They're very dark, and they get darker as well as the series goes on, I think.
Yeah, they are. It definitely starts dark.
Yeah, it starts with a live burial, which is a good place to start, I think, if you're going to kind of set your standards, set your stall out.
Yeah,
from the point of view of the person being buried.
Yeah, definitely. Like Sam says, definitely not cozy.
Yeah, because I think I wanted to go. I read a lot about trauma. I wanted to understand the main detective, how he would, as I say, his psychology, his psychological makeup is going to help him and hinder him, and as he comes up against some pretty unpleasant things. But the main thing I wanted to do was to not make it cartoonish, to not make the kind of bad guys sort of the bad guys. I really try to make the people that Sawyer comes up against to be real people, to be rounded, to have their own backstories, to have a real sense that whatever's brought them to the current place, the choices they're making, is going to be reflected in the book in some way. So you don't just have him facing, a big bad every book. There is the complexity of the case sort of goes alongside the reveal of the complexity of the villain, I guess, if you see what I mean. And then you also have Sawyer's kind of backstory running with that. So yeah, that's what the books are about.
So we've got some hellos. We've got hellos from Sam, Trevor Belshaw, and Trevor and Pat Barnes.
Hello. Thank Christ someone's turned up on a sunny day. I was worried.
And you said you made Jake sort of have his own unique thing, so he doesn't really have a fear kind of response.
Yeah.
Which is also in some other books that we won't name.
Well, I mean, very minds think alike, yeah. But I kind of I'm not putting myself out to be a great mind there. But I think the thing, my idea really was with a character who's witnessed something so horrific as a child, um, as his mother being murdered in front of him, was where do you take, you're already starting at a pretty dark level there. Where do you take that? What would be the implications of that? And so as the series continues, initially, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but as there's a sense that Sawyer's trying to explore this reason why he doesn't feel a primal sort of fear response in situations, and there is a condition that's that's known, a condition of the amygdala, which is where the kind of fear response is um, generally works in the brain. And so there's an initial suspicion that maybe there's something going on with his brain. There's a lesion or something that's causing this lack of fear response. And I suppose it started with me thinking that whenever I watch kind of detectives dealing with all kinds of horrors, I always think they're human beings. Aren't they kind of terrified themselves? Why aren't they reacting? They're professional, but surely there must be something in them that reacts to the horror of what's going on and the fear that it might happen to them. And you sort of see that, but you kind of rarely see the deeper emotional side of it. So I thought, what if a character who there's a reason for that? He doesn't feel it. He doesn't feel fear. He just feels a kind of a sort of um, logical sense of what might happen and how we can um, take steps. But he doesn't feel that as in The Gift of Fear, which is a book that's referenced in Creepy Crawly, which we'll probably get onto later. But yeah, what if he doesn't feel that? But for me, I wanted to try, as the series continues, I wanted to make that about the horrible thing that he's witnessed. Um, his response, his lack of fear response, is partly to do with trauma. It's more to do with the depth of his trauma that he explores more and more as the series goes on. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's okay. Isn't it true that, I mean, I think there's sort of two parts to that, because I think um, if you work sort of in things that are scary, you learn to do a mask of dealing with things.
Yeah,
You might process it after an event rather than during.
yeah,
But also, doesn't that condition generally lead to people having too much fear? It's kind of rare for it to cause
yeah.
a
Which
lack of fear. It tends to go the other way around.
Yeah, and it's incredibly rare as well. We're talking about Urbach, which is a kind of the condition that's really Urbach. I can't remember. I can never remember how to pronounce it. It's spelled Wiethe Urbach. It's like a German term, but that was just incredibly rare. Just the kind of condition of the amygdala. The amygdala doesn't develop properly. So obviously, there's a book that's referenced in Creepy Crawly called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, which is a great book explaining why fear is that natural sense that we feel something not right here. Gut feeling is something to be. It's not something to be dismissed. It's something that's you because your brain your brain's response, your limbic system works much quicker than your logical reading of a situation. So when you're feeling that tingle, that gut feeling that something not good about this, I can't put my finger on it. You should be trusting that. And so yeah, that all comes in the amygdala. A lot of it comes in the amygdala. So I wanted to try and explore the idea that what somebody has a faulty, their system is faulty. But yeah, as you say, the actual condition is more complex than just he has no fear. But as the series goes on, then as I say, the nature of his response is revealed to be more about the depth of his trauma.
Yeah, I remember talking to someone else who's written about it,
Yeah.
and they were saying actually the general presentation of the few people who've had it is that they're sort of scared of everything.
Yes. Yeah, which isn't good, is it? Because you need to discriminate, and that's almost like by definition, a generalized anxiety disorder, isn't it? If you're afraid of everything, then that's very difficult to live in the world sort of successfully. And so you need to be able to discriminate between things that are worth being afraid of. It's a good idea to be wary of them, and things that you are fine, just a but this book, and then another book that I've read about called "The Body Keeps the Score," which is fantastic book by Wessel van der Kolk, who's a Dutch psychologist. Who actually he's the initial guy who worked with um, post-traumatic stress disorder. He sort of basically coined the term because he worked with Vietnam veterans and noticed that they came back from Vietnam. They were struggling. They were struggling in their lives. They were struggling to form meaningful relationships. They were making bad choices. Many of them were suicidal. And at the time, you probably remember that they used to be called shell shock in the First World War. Um, and so, at a time when not so enlightened about perhaps about mental health and the subtleties of mental health problems, so that became he looked at that and thought, well, this shell shock is too broad a term. I need to understand more about what's going on for these people because they're literally experiencing their traumas in front of them as if they're happening again. You think of the idea of flashbacks as something that's kind of like an easy thing to do as in cinema to kind of evoke some sort of horror. But post-traumatic stress, when you get a flashback, from what I've read and spoken to people about, is it's literally it's happening in front of you. It feels indistinguishable. It's like a really, really extreme panic attack. So, so yeah. What was the question again?
I don't think there was one.
Yeah. So it's just that I was really fascinated by that, the whole idea of where this comes from, with the implications of it, how how it might how it might help as well as hinder somebody who has to put themselves in very dark, difficult, dangerous situations.
I think it does add a little bit to the sort of it it lightens the book a little bit though,
Yeah,
his condition at times, doesn't it? Like there's a moment where he phones someone and he's on a roller coaster
that's right. Yeah,
and
yeah,
he's just not thinking about it. And I think it that brought like a bit of kind of humour to the book. It was handled well.
yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I think it's just trying to get his character isn't just a doomy, you know, sort of drinks too much, three marriages, behind him kind of character. I wanted to make him quite arrested, so he's almost like a teenager in an adult's body in many ways, which again is explored as the series continues. Why that's happened because the 90s when he grew up, he's almost kind of stuck there a little bit, which is another characteristic of trauma. But yeah, the so I wanted to make the character quite funny, quite witty, sharp, but huge, huge defenses, like a huge wall up in front of him at all times. Um, Understandably, given what he's been through. So yeah, and also I think he is quite funny. I think it's trying to get that. If you're going to write books, dark crime books, they can be a bit gothic if you don't get a little bit of a light streak of humour in there. And I think Sawyer is quite funny, and he's but very in a very mordant sort of way. But yeah, his choices are quite odd sometimes. He's quite, and he doesn't quite understand the implications of making those choices. And again, as the series goes on, you'll realise that you see him really putting people around him in danger. The more outlandish his decisions get, and the badder his ideas get. And it's almost a story about him coming to terms with that idea that he has to get a hold of himself in order to keep people around him safer. Yeah,
You said you're writing the last book in the
yeah,
series now.
yes.
So how many books is that in total that there'll be?
Well, I had an idea. I sort of had an idea for the end of the arc. I just wanted to write something with a single arc that really stops and doesn't. Because I'm a huge fan of things like The Sopranos, for example, which is a TV series that just finished, and it has for me it just things that have that finality to them. Just I don't know, they just live a lot bit longer for me, just rather than writing 26 books with the same character. Fine, I mean, so a lot of people do that really well, but I knew I'd just get restless eventually, so I tried to plan it as a kind of shorter arc. So yeah, there's going to be 10 books, and there's 10 books in total at the moment, including There's going to be 10 books in total, including the prequel novella. So yeah, I think that's enough, don't you, for a series? For a series? What's the longest series you know?
It depends on what genre that you're in.
Yeah, there must be.
Because I've read ones like Ellie Griffith's series that I really like is about 15.
Yeah,
But I read series in other things where I'm up to about 30.
yeah,
And they're very similar, but I kind of like that.
yeah. I understand why people do like it. Yeah,
And then I'm looking at like my manga collection, and there are mangas that go to like, I don't own any of them, but there are mangas that go to like 100
yes.
in the same series.
But I think what I wanted to do with the Sawyer series was to have it's almost like one book because it's sequential, and I think it's probably because I'm a film journalist. I'm used to film. I'm used to TV, the sort of the language of the way those things start, the way they end, the way they segue. So I sort of wanted it to be sequential, which a lot of fellow authors have said to me. The problem with that is really you've really got to get people in at the beginning and they go through the whole series. It's very difficult. You can't just start by reading, oh, book 4 looks interesting, I'll start with book 4. So that's just not possible with the Sawyer series, really. So it's kind of like one book, yeah, it's one long book that, or because I think of it as one long, like a sort of TV series, I think of it cinematically. So, Sawyer's backstory is the scene that runs through the whole thing, but there's a main case to each book. Um, that highlights a lot of his issues, a lot of the stuff that he does have going on as well. But also, the end of each book, there's a sort of a cliffhanger, but it's a kind of fair cliffhanger, I think, because it's a cliffhanger based on Sawyer's backstory, not on the main case. So it's designed to make people think, I want to read the next book now because I want to find out what's going to happen with Sawyer's story.
That
So
definitely worked on me.
good.
Got to the end of book 1 and was like, I do need to read book 2 now because you left me on a cliffhanger.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's Raymond Chandler who said that the end of a chapter should lead people to the next chapter, and the end of the book should lead people to the next book. So you have to be thinking along those terms, particularly now when you're trying to write a series and you're trying to get people to stick with the thing, stick with it from beginning to end. So yeah, it's a marketing quirk, but I think it's justified as long as you can make it justified within the story. But
Sam says
yes,
that she's read 18 so far in Mark Billingham's
okay.
Thorn series.
Mm.
That might be the longest she's read.
Yeah.
The longest I've read is 40.
40. Wow.
Yeah, it's a manga series. I can just see like book 40 on
Yeah.
the side.
I just don't understand that. I really admire writers who do, but I don't think I have the stamina for it. I've just got too many other things I want to write, too many other characters and ideas. I just get
Well,
lost.
annoyingly, it's a series that will never be finished. The
Yeah.
one that I read 40 of.
Well,
Because it was not finished and the author has died.
yeah. Well, it's kind of inevitable, isn't it? I suppose it's going to finish eventually. Yeah, you can't.
I think he left enough behind that there's going to be one extra volume.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it's that I would quite like to have the stamina for that. And of course, there's no real reason why you can write multiple series at the same time in parallel. Fine, but personally, I just think I had this idea for where this character came from, how I would get him to the end, and what the end would be of the final book, which I'm working on now. I just wanted to stay true to that and let it rest and then move on to something else.
Before I ask you the other question that's on the screen, I will pick up your film journalist.
Yeah.
kind of career. When you were writing the books, were you thinking about them being filmed? Have you written them sort of in a way that you think would make them filmable? Or have you kind of rebelled against it? Because I know people who've done both, author-wise, who've decided that because they're writing their own books, they're going to make them almost unfilmable.
Oh no, I'm totally the opposite. You know, I'd love to see this filmed. I'd love to see it, you know, on streaming. I'd love to see it turned into a series. Because I mean, I think cinematically in that sense, because I used to be a film journalist, so I just have that sort of in my DNA a bit now. So I can't help but block out scenes in my mind cinematically where people are standing, how the camera would move around, all of those things. Because I think I don't know, I think you just get a sense of I need to be able to see it play out in my mind really specifically. And then strip away all the tell and just leave as much, you know, only leave show. Because that's almost like writing a screenplay and then just, you know, directing everything as well, stage directions. But yeah, I do see it really clearly. I see Sawyer really clearly in my mind. You know, the kind of actor who would play him. And yeah, I mean, I haven't intentionally written it in the Peak District because it's pretty and it'd be nice. It'd be nice to film it, but it doesn't hurt, does it?
It doesn't.
Yeah. So I do think it is. I do think it's very filmable, and I do think of it as something that's because the supporting characters I think would be great to cast. I work really hard on the supporting characters, and so yeah, I do think it would work really well as a cinematically. I'm totally shameless about that. I'm not trying to write something kind of strange and meta and surreal or you know play with the form. I'm sticking to the tropes in lots of ways, but like I say, I want to try and explore more of this idea of how this character copes, survives, redeems, recovers. You know, is very, very focused on trauma.
Paul Hughes has asked if you had any plans to write any standalones.
Yeah, I got a plan to write a standalone next, actually, and yeah, I had an idea. I had an idea a long time ago before Breaking Bad, actually, which was because the thing I loved about Breaking Bad was the idea that there's an ordinary person to start with, and then what turns an ordinary person into a bad guy, which has obviously been like it's been touched on in some things like The Dark Knight, you know, comic in a more of a comic book sense. But I was really drawn to that idea of an ordinary, quite mundane character who, through extraordinary circumstances, is forced to commit crimes, to do bad things. And so, yeah, I'm looking at bringing that idea back next to write a kind of standalone. You just get a lot of pressure. You get a lot of pressure to write series. You get a lot of pressure because it's hugely competitive at the moment to write anything. You know, in terms of content, it's just a tsunami. So, and AI obviously isn't going to help that. So you do get a lot of pressure to write in series because of the inbuilt marketing effect. But yeah, I have ideas for standalones. The standalone idea that I'm thinking on is basically this ordinary guy who's on. Please don't. Is this going to be recorded just in case someone steals my idea?
It is recorded.
Yeah, it was. The idea is going to be a book called Hard Labour, and the idea is that this ordinary guy he's sort of negligent in some way on a school sort of trip, and there's an accident, some kids die, and he spends time in prison for manslaughter. And while he's in prison, he learns that Mr. Big, or whatever, a key character in the prison, is an uncle of one of the kids who died. And so he knows he's going to be getting out soon, and he says, "You're going to go do some jobs for me when you get out." So some dirty work. So I like the idea that it sounds really pretentious when I say it, but because it's called hard labor, I wanted the idea that he's been given like labor's like kind of a Hercules sense. and so almost like an update with the sort of labours of Hercules. I'm a big fan of Greek mythology. So the sort of challenge is to write a book like that. I wanted to set it in the 80s or the 70s as well, to get away from this. Maybe we'll touch on this later, but to get away from phones, ANPR, satellites, all the kind of things that make crime writing quite difficult these days, I think, to get things to work. And it's obviously a much darker, in a sense, it's a much kind of rougher, grittier time as well, the 80s, particularly in the UK. So I like the idea that this guy's going to get out. He's going to have to do these labours for somebody, and along the way, I have ideas for where that can take the story. But yeah, so I do want to write standalone. I think it's, in a way, it's almost an act of rebellion now for writers to write standalones, because you get told to write series all the time.
Rules for school trips are really a lot laxer in the 80s as well.
The what? Sorry, say that again.
Rules for school trips are a lot laxer in the 80s as well. So
well, yeah, that's helpful, isn't it? Yeah, that is quite helpful. But I think my idea was to start, again, cinematically, was to start with something particularly horrific, an accident that he's negligent in some way. Because when you introduce children, when you introduce that kind of a setting, there's a kind of a tension, but there's also kind of slight rules you're not allowed to break. You have to be very careful with children, with animals, what you do, because it can be too much. It could be a turn off. It can be just too difficult for some people. So I think the trick is what you leave, what you have on screen, and what you have off screen, off the page, and just the way you do that you have to do that quite carefully. You don't necessarily have to show the horror. There's a series that I really love at the moment called Mr. In Between, which is an Australian TV series, and that follows a hitman, quite a sort of blue-collar hitman in the suburbs of Sydney. That's particularly good. It's very modern. It's a big inspiration, actually. It's really beautifully acted and written by Scott Ryan. And the thing that does really well is what it decides to show and what it decides not to show. And there's also, he does some pretty horrific things, but it's very, very good at making decisions about what it shows and when it just pulls away or cuts and leaves it to your imagination, because often what's in your imagination is a lot worse than what can be depicted on screen. And when somebody tries to depict something that's a bit too graphic, it often can seem a little bit comical, a bit strange, a bit too much, squirting blood and things. So you have to be very, very deft about how you do that.
Yeah, I think probably the most terrifying thing I've ever read was Shirley Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
In the house, and that he doesn't really show nothing really happens.
Yeah.
It's all just left up to you, isn't it? It's all just suggestion and and it's genuinely terrifying. I could only read it in the day, and I wouldn't let my husband leave the room until I'd finished it. I was like,
yeah. Well, M.L. James is like that as well. Ghost stories like M.L. James as well, where there's a lot that's implied. Yeah, there's a lot that's just, it's all playing in your imagination. Who wrote The Little Strangers? Sarah Waters, is it? That's a good book. That's very similar to that, where there's a lot of implied sort of chilly things going on, but you don't actually see anything too specific. It's that Spielberg thing, isn't it? The moment you see the shark in Jaws, the film's over, isn't it? Because the shark under the water is terrifying, the hidden menace. But the moment you see that rubbery shark, that's the end of the film. It's the kind of, I think it might be a Hitchcock trope to sort of never show the monster or try not to show the monster. But yeah, if you can, you need to balance. I think you need a balance, and when you decide to show something horrific, there's just a shock effect, and when you decide to pull away and just put it in the reader's mind, because that's quite a strong, it's a strong kind of insult in its own right. You just putting something and forcing something for the reader to imagine. It's very hard to do it well, but yeah, a lot of writers do it really well. I hope I do. Mr. In Between the series, I really recommend it. It does it brilliantly.
Yeah, I noticed it happening a bit in yours.
Yeah.
Like you were You sort of lead people with like the first event in the book, but then a lot of other things are just suggested, and
Yeah,
you kind of know where they're going, and your mind takes you there.
yeah, I hope so. It's good to hear that. Yeah, yeah, because it would just become tedious, wouldn't it? Every single thing is just a gore fest. I mean, this kind of film, there's a whole film genre really that does that. And if you like it, fine, that's what you're going to get. That's your bag. But but I think you have to be a bit more subtle, particularly in books. It's very difficult to write. Very difficult to write good fight scenes. Um, obviously, well, I mean, it's very difficult to write good sex scenes for a start. But it's very, very hard to write good good violence that works in a sense, in the way that you want to horrify, but without it leading to people putting the book down because they just think, I can't deal with this. It's a really fine line. But yeah,
I think the best one I read like that recently was Bullet Train.
okay, yeah,
The book, not the movie. The book
yeah,
is definitely better.
yeah. I haven't read that, but yeah,
And that balance, that does the action like really well.
yeah. I think it's a trick. It's something you sort of get better at. You realise that within scenes in their own right, it's what you show and what you don't show is part of the skill um, of writing, and yeah, you get better. You get better the more you do it. I think, and particularly with crime, you have to be very careful that you're not just constantly turning the dial all the way up. Just tease it. On some things are on 2, some things go up to 4, then you pull back to 2 again. Sometimes you go up to 11, but you have to kind of really balance it. It's like a playlist. You can't just have the same type of song crashing away. You've got to kind of pace it, fade it down a bit, bring it back up. It's quite musical.
I don't know, I do my playlist by mood.
Do you?
Yeah, totally. I've got like a happy playlist and an angry playlist.
Or maybe a DJ then. Maybe a DJ is a better example.
And a mellow playlist, if you know
Yeah,
what I mean. So like
maybe,
everything's got
yeah,
a
I understand that.
in
Yeah,
it, but
I get. Yeah, but I suppose if you're trying to sort of get a crowd, if you're a DJ, you don't want to be constantly playing just exhausting sort of bangers. You want to be dropping the pace a little bit, let them have a breather, and then bring it back up again slowly, all that kind of thing. I'm comparing writing to DJing.
no, I don't think it was that. I'm sticking with your journalism thing though, because I'm just kind of interested, and I'm gonna throw this in. So, film and video game journalist, right?
The what? Sorry,
Did you say film and video game?
video games as well. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Just
So,
idiot grandchild things, really.
favorite favorite film of all time and of this year,
Film of all time.
and of this year. So, cause
Oh gosh.
let's put you on the spot
Yeah, my
doubly,
favorite
and then
films.
favorite video game as well.
Yeah, my favorite films shift around. My favorite film is probably Blade Runner because it's such a sort of annoyingly obvious choice, but because it really works on so many levels for me as a cinematic thing, and I keep coming back to it. It feels really ahead of its time, but it feels really dated in some ways as well. But yeah, I just love that film. I could rewatch it endlessly. There's so much richness to it. It has a lot to say about the human condition, about memory, about existential. It's quite a philosophical film. The performances are incredible. And I love the world. I love the way they create that world and they don't show you too much of it. You just have to be, you just get deposited in the middle of this world. Um, I think it's, yeah, I just think it's a beautiful piece of cinema, physically, cinematographically, cinematographically, is that a word? Cinematographically. So yeah, I just love that film. I love that I can endlessly watch it. It's really quotable. It just sounds great. It's so many things about that film that I love. But yeah, I also love a lot of films. Uh, like I don't know, I'm going to list of films that I like. What was the one? Which film do I like this year?
Yeah.
Um, Film this year is I think it's this year. It's After Sun. It's a film called After Sun, which is quite a low budget film set in a kind of an all inclusive holiday resort, I think in Turkey, and it's a young single father taking his daughter. his young daughter, who's just on the cusp of teenage, hormones are kicking in, and he just takes her on this trip to this all-inclusive holiday in Turkey. There's no helicopter explosions, and there's nothing thrilling about it. But all the story is internal. I think we might get onto this, but for me, story is internal. It's about the internal arcs of the characters, the experiences of the characters, how they change, how you meet them, and how they move through that arc. That for me is story, and plot is just external. Plot is just the external events. So, but this film, Aftersun, it's the way that her father, she's sort of growing up. Her father's obviously suffering in some way from some kind of depression, but it's beautifully done. It's hugely, really emotional. Anyone who's been a parent will love it. But also, it's just, it really has a lot to say about love, about those connections, about familial love, about how you do anything for your daughter, for your children. And it's low budget. There's nothing particularly fancy about it, but it gets everything so right in the performances, all the subtleties, characters. Paul Mescal was great. So they're the two films that have stood out for me lately. What else? What was your other question? Video games.
Yeah, favorite video game.
My favorite video game is quite old. It's called Robotron. It's an arcade game from the 1980s. So that's probably going to feature in this book I'm going to write at some point. But yeah, it's just this ridiculously hostile. You're just a guy in the middle of the screen, and there's things converging on you. You just got to shoot everything, shoot your way out. It's beautifully done. Sounds great. Really well made. More recent games I love the latest Legend of Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom, because it has a real depth to it. There's a creativity to the way you solve the puzzles. You can fuse logs together and make bridges. You solve everything really laterally. You don't feel you're on rails. You get a sense that it gives you problems, and you can be lateral and creative to solve them. Plus, it's an enormous world. It's just a great world to kind of go in and have a little stroll around for an hour, just to explore. It's like that, has that childlike quality that when you're a kid, you just go out into some woods somewhere and see what's around, explore. It just has that feeling. I love that kind of expansive feel that games can give you now technologically. Yeah. But when I wrote about games, I was writing about games in the 90s, and they were much less sophisticated, but the Sega and Nintendo days. But yeah, what are your favourite films?
Sam said you missed the film title. You said Blade Runner.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Big fan of Blade Runner. We have Blade Runner 2049 that keep meaning to do as a marathon.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. Yeah, I like both of them, yeah.
Because they're both great. Big fan of Philip K. Dick as an author in general.
Me too, yeah. Real amazing brain, a writer, amazing, imagination. And a lot of his work, again, one of those things where, the real geniuses always feel ahead of their time, don't they? And he's a classic example of that. His work is just incredibly, it's so prescient. He wrote that book, what do they call it? There's a book where the most famous man in the world wakes up and he's not famous anymore. I can't remember the title. And he just goes to his office. He can't get in. No one recognizes him. His bank account's empty. It's like a Kafkaesque sort of nightmare. But it really, I think he probably wrote that in the 40s or something, or the 50s. But that really speaks about, the nature of modern celebrity and how it's ephemeral, influences all that kind of current world that we live in now, which, what a time to be alive. But it's amazing that how he was writing about those anxieties, back in that day. Yeah.
But there's a writer called Sarah Moorhead. I talk about her a lot in author chats, but she writes very much like a modern Philip K. Dick.
Yeah.
And I can imagine if they made the movies for books, it would be like a Blade Runner. Do you know what I mean? You would be going to watch it and being like, I need to watch this again and again and again to sort of see all of the layers.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it earlier. Someone, if like someone were to make sort of to see it into a film or a TV series, something like that, it would be. It would be a lovely thing to happen, but I remember getting some advice from somebody who had it happen to them, and they said the main thing you can do is just to leave it to them, and just the last thing you want to be is a writer who's just like on set going, hey, he wouldn't say that, he wouldn't sound like that. You just have to leave it, and let them get on with it. Yeah, let's hope that happens one day.
I do wonder about that balance. You do see ones where writers have kind of stood back and let people do what they want with it, and then they've kind of almost ruined the series for
Yeah,
the fans of the books, or taken it in a completely different direction so it works. So, like Darlene Harris's True Blood series is an example of that.
yeah, yeah.
The TV show is dramatically different from the books, and she acknowledges she had nothing to do with it.
Well, let's talk about Wolf. I mean, that's on at the moment, isn't it? That's Mo Hader,
Yeah.
who's one of my favourite writers, one of my favourite crime writers. She's kind of one of the books that I think all crime writers are in its shadow. Anyway, the kind of crime I write anyway is Birdman, her first book, which is a masterpiece. And then there's Wolf, the TV series, has really turned up all the dials, as we were talking about before, isn't it? Have you seen it?
No.
Yeah. So that's particularly um, gory. It's jumped on. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but that's one version of how to do it. Just turn everything up. But then there's also another book I think crime writers are in its shadows. Red Dragon by Thomas Harris was the first Hannibal Lecter book, which I think is an incredible masterpiece as well. But the way that he handles that, like I was saying earlier, I was really influenced by the way that he handles the villain, or the idea of this character, the Tooth Fairy, who is his background is really beautifully fleshed out. His psychology. Thomas Harris has obviously spent a lot of time working out how to make his villain, whatever, like a real person. And as gruesome and unpleasant as he is, he does horrific things. You completely believe him, and he's a hero in his own mind. And
Well, he spent a dramatic amount of time, didn't he, with the people he wrote Mindhunter?
yes, yeah,
Like the actual people who
yeah,
did the studies and things.
yeah, and that's a great series as well. That the Mindhunter series, and
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of the Mindhunter
yeah,
series.
and his book, John Douglas's book, was a real influence on me when I read it when I was writing Creepy Crawly, because there's a couple of his ideas that are in Creepy Crawly, you probably noticed, is that the way Sawyer talks about, when you want to understand the artist, you need to study his art, which is a key point of John Douglas's, that if a killer does not see himself as doing bad things, there's a pathology behind those choices, behind those decisions that you have to understand. There's no point tabloidizing something and saying, "Oh, he's a monster," or you're not really going to learn anything. You're not going to get anywhere closer to catching somebody. So yeah, a lot of John Douglas's ideas. I mean, a lot of those ideas from the early FBI behavioral science guys are now just seen as pretty outmoded, quite dated. Profiling, all of those things now. I think technology has, in some ways, overridden them, and that now you don't really get serial killers very much anymore in terms of classical 70s and 80s types. But yeah, his ideas, the way that you need to try and understand, and then in order to catch killers, rather than say, "Oh, they're monsters, I can anybody do something like that." That doesn't really help you.
I think there's still a lot of kind of behavioural science, though, even if it's not
Yeah,
necessarily in terms of catching
yeah.
serial
So
killers. And there's a lot of trying to like motivations for people's actions and
yeah,
things
of
like
course. Yeah, and I think that's just. I'm just saying. I think it's evolved quite a lot from initially just saying, because John Douglas was famously really specific in his profiling, and you would say, what kind of shirt somebody was wearing as well, or something, and they would always still turn out to be true. But I just want it to be plausible when I write. I want the ideas to be based on science. I want the science to be good, to be strong, because the thing about science is, it's almost like it's about uncertainty, isn't it? You're dealing with uncertainty, so you're testing things, you're asking questions, you're almost trying to break your ideas just to make sure that they're robust. You're not saying this is how to do it, solve that problem, certainty. That's kind of the end. That's sort of the end of it. So yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, behavioral science, all that stuff is fascinating. I'd love to do a degree in, I don't know, forensic pathology or something, or psychopathology.
Do you think it's important to get your science right? But that is partly because I'm a science teacher, and it annoys me if people
Of course, yeah, you are. Yeah, yes, yeah. You just have to be. You have to be. But you'll know as a teacher, the value of asking questions rather than just stating facts. Um, the Socratic method or whatever. But yeah, I wanted to kind of do all the research into, as I say, trauma, um, all the behavioural science stuff, and to make sure the people that Sawyer comes up against in this series, who make some pretty unpleasant choices, shall we say, feel real. Feel as real as he is. And obviously, the key thing when you're writing villains, if they can parallel your good guy in some way, then I think it's even more spicy. There's almost a sense that in a parallel world, the bad guy could have been him. He could have gone that way.
I think it's interesting what you said earlier as well about characters sort of being the most important. Really.
Sorry, the characters. What? Sorry, you broke up a bit there.
I think the characters have to drive. You have to have very real, fleshed out characters to really drive a series.
Yeah, because I think that's like I was saying. I mean, I'm an editor. I'm a writing coach. I work with authors as well, and I often get authors who they come to me with a manuscript, and it's just all plot. It's all events. It's all world building. It's all surface really, and then they create this kind of world, and then they think, okay, I'll put some characters in it now, which I'm just sort of howling at them. Just no. You've got to start with the character. You've got to start with the internal story. For me, the story is that internal journey that characters go through. That's what keeps people reading. And the plot is just how you get the character from one point to another, how you get them through something, how you test that character. But I don't think it's the other way around, because if you started, because then you just got it's all plot, it's all events. This is why people give up on books. They say I couldn't get into it, or it just kind of lost me. It got too complicated. That's because that at some point the writer, I think, has lost track of the character, lost track of the character's internal story.
Do you think that's easier to do if you're writing a series, or?
It's not. My editor goes crazy. Me and my editor work really closely. She knows the series as well as I do, better probably, I think. But yeah, it gets harder. The more books you write in a series, the more stuff you've got to remember, what color glasses somebody wears, or what they've said to them before, or if they're it does get quite hard to kind of keep track of everything. So I'm actually, in response to that question from earlier, I'm actually quite looking forward to writing something that is just plucked out of the air. I don't need to worry about continuity, because it is tricky.
You will have to worry about, though, if you're going back to like 70s or 80s, getting like the language right.
I got the language right, yeah.
And like the technology right, and kind of what was there at that time. And
the problem with writing things set in, particularly in the 80s, is you can't have everyone just playing with Rubik's cubes and things. You can't just have, like in the 70s, you just go, oh, someone's got a space opera, fine, sorted. That's my research. But with the Rubik's cube, not many people had them. The problem is that in the 80s, the 80s are still the 70s until at least 1984, 85. For most people anyway. So you can't just suddenly just drop in. This is one thing I learned from film journalism. You can't just suddenly design a set in 1985 full of things that were around that came into being in 1985. There's still going to be loads of stuff from the previous 10 years. You can't. That's where it kind of looks a bit plasticky and unreal. So you have to have a sort of a degree of fuzzy logic in your research, I think, to make it plausible.
My brother used to make money at high school selling the solutions to Rubik's cubes.
Wow. What? Sorry, say again. The Rubik's cube.
You can print out a solution for how you solve a Rubik's cube
Oh, okay.
and make
I used
one.
to take the labels off.
So he used to sell the solutions for like so much a sheet.
I saw the record. This is a brilliant digression, by the way, Karen. But I saw the record was 3.8 seconds for solving the Rubik's cube the other day.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's people, it's like competitions for it, isn't there? There's
Yeah.
like people who are really good at solving them.
Yeah, but I used to take the labels off and just swap the labels around.
Yeah, I
Which
don't
I
know
think
how
is valid. I think
competition.
that's a perfectly valid way to do it. Not, a lot of people would say that's cheating, but it's just lateral, isn't it? It's just a lateral way to do it.
Do you have a nostalgia when you're going to go back through there? Do you think you'll have a bit of a nostalgia wave of things from the 80s that you had that were like, or will you just feel really old? So my husband bought me a tiny Care Bear the other day, and apparently they are 40 years old, and they made me feel ridiculously old when I got that.
Well, I spent most of my time at amusement arcades in the 80s, and just shuffling around provincial streets and record shops, that kind of thing. So musically, I'm massively nerdy about music, so that'll be quite interesting to kind of go back to that. But yeah, I know what you mean. I think you have to be careful not to indulge too much. Just drop in things here and there. Like I say, the fuzzy logic is important. Don't make it too on the nose. Don't make it too perfect. Don't make it set a book set in 1985 and everything is there from 1985. Just go back a little bit. Still going to be wandering around in flares for a couple of years, I think.
I got the vibe of the love of music from Creepy Crawley because there's a lot of like
Yeah.
bands and.
Well, I get readers saying, "Is there a Spotify playlist?" But as they go through the series, there's a lot of music in the series. So I listen to a lot of 90s music because, like I said before, there's this arrested idea that he stuck to a degree as a teenager in the 90s where he felt safest. That comes through as the series continues, as he goes into therapy and things. But yeah, I like the idea that people are just saying, "Oh, I've never heard of that," and they go and listen to the music or they go and investigate it. And I do get that. Readers saying they do that. So yeah, I'm going to do. I think I'll probably do a Spotify playlist at the end of the series, the whole thing. Just do a big sort of Sawyer spectacular as a way of drawing a line under it. There's all the music.
People do that, don't they? Put like a list of. I've read books where people have put like a list of the things they were listening to as they wrote it, or
Oh right, okay.
appear in the books. I think there's a guy in here that Sam will remember the name of that I don't, that has got actual albums that go with his books.
Yeah. Well, I listen to ambient music. I listen to lots of ambient music when I'm writing. I can't be listening to anything with lyrics. But I also listen to weird things like we talk about Blade Runner. There's a brilliant YouTube video of Blade Runner apartment ambience. Basically, Deckard's apartment, just a kind of weird, sort of just a repeating cycled noise, ambient noise. Because I think it's about 24 hours long or something, the YouTube video. So it's brilliant to have on in the background, just as this kind of sort of cancelling effect in the background that I find it really helps me to zone in when I'm writing. But I often listen to lots of ambient stuff like Brian lots of electronic music, Aphex Twin, things that are really non-lyrical, but there's something going on that's kind of in the background. Sometimes I would put things harder stuff on if I'm writing quite dark, quite aggressive scenes, but I just find I can get into the zone a lot easier now without doing that. But yeah, music's really important in the books.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you have that alongside. I'd like to see the playlist. Like when
Yeah,
people,
I'll do that.
it's like when people put pictures, isn't it, as the locations that they use. I think it just gives you another way of connecting with the book.
Yeah, and like I say, I like the idea that people will just go, "Oh, I wonder what that is. Oh, I've never heard of that," and then they go and listen to it, and they get a sense of what it is. Because Sawyer's favourite album is Loveless by My Bloody Valentine, which is my favourite album as well. But sometimes you just get lazy and just go, I know what I'll do. I'll have him like what I like, because then I can. It's easy to explain it. But yeah, because that's something that it's so it's fuzzy, it's strange. It's a different album every time I listen to it. There's something else in it because it's so nebulous and this kind of swirling guitars, and I find it really meditative and quite sort of relaxing. A lot of people just would listen to it and go, "What's this rubbish? It's noise." But I find it really quite relaxing, actually. I think it's what Brian Eno said something similar. Like he said, music designed to make me feel relaxed just makes me anxious. I think it's kind of the opposite for me. I often listen to things that are quite strange and aggressive and find them quite relaxing. Same with video games. I play really hostile shoot 'em up type video games because I find that quite meditative, which also gets into the books. Sawyer plays this game called Bullet Symphony. I don't think you've seen that yet in Creepy Crawly yet. Like a Japanese bullet hell shoot 'em up. So he plays that as a meditative way of clearing his mind. But there's also a lot of the place, the Peak District itself is there's a place that he goes to called Thor's Cave, which is in the South Peak District. It's a beautiful, like a crag cave, a high crag, where he goes to. That's his not his happy place, but his place that he goes to ponder cases. And he has a couple of epiphanies while he's doing that. And I used to go there a lot as a kid. I used to get taken there a lot. I've got really strong memories of it. So you do get a lot of yourself into the books.
I get what you're saying about the video. I'm not very good with video games.
Right.
I have a very low tolerance of anything, so I can't play anything first person. But
you mean the movement, motion sickness?
I'm epileptic. It's a
I see, right. Yeah.
thing. But I quite like really aggressive ones are quite good for just getting a bit of your
yeah.
But it can be quite calming.
Yeah, it's cathartic, isn't it? It's just it's kind of like horror. I like horror films for that reason, really. It's that I think you're emotionally you're feeling something, but you're safe. Your body, you're fooling your body into being, your body's reacting to something. But so it's a buzz, it's a thrill, it's a dopamine hit. But intellectually, you're sitting in a room watching it on screen, so you're fine. But yeah, I know what you mean. You can just remove yourself a little bit.
You've got a minute.
Okay.
Left of our author chat. Remind people what they're going to go away and buy.
Okay, first book in the series is called Creepy Crawly. It's currently 8 books, main novels, and there's a prequel called The Long Dark, which is set just before the events of Creepy Crawly. They're set in northern England. They're dark crime, not for the faint-hearted, as Caroline herself said. And they start dark, they get darker. So, strap in, but they're not subconsciously gory or anything like that. They're just exploring the sort of darker psychology of this character in the cases. So yeah, hope you enjoy them.
They're all well, I'm going to say they're all excellent. I've already read the first one.
Yeah.
Book 2 is my Kindle. So they're good enough that I downloaded book 2 straight away.
Right. Stronger Than Death definitely goes into the psychology of Sawyer much deeper. Stronger Than Death has a main character villain. I have a detective who I consult with. And my yardstick is when I give him my idea for the story, I need him to. When I told him the idea behind Stronger Than Death, he went, "That's what I want. That's the reaction I want from a hardened meth detective." So I hope you enjoy it. It has quite a dark concept.
That's an excellent thing.
If this conversation had one of those word clouds, the word dark would be very close, wouldn't it? Very high up.
It would. Dark and not faint-hearted horror.
Yeah, but there is humour in there. This is the thing. It's that I said that thing in Leeds. Make it dark, but tell me a joke. I don't know who said that, but I often think of that. You can't just have this big, massive, brooding, emo, gothic pace all the way through. Because
No, you
these are real
need
people. They have to they have to deal with things. They have to find humor, and they have to find ways to get through this stuff. So there's no good having these people wandering around brooding all the time,
you're right.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm running out. I'm losing my voice a little bit.
It's okay. Well, we're at the end of our time, so thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Karen. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Just going on about my books. Yeah, it was a pleasure. I'd love to do it again.